The sun had gone soft and low when Ezra Cole saw the barn door standing open like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. Wind carried the smell of hot wood and old straw. A meadowlark hopped along the fence post, turned its head, and turned it back, as if even the small things were keeping watch on the dry willow place, now that the summer's hands had moved their cattle off and left the outbuildings to sag. Ezra swung down from his gelding and listened. The quiet had a pulse to it, the kind a man felt in his teeth. He eased his hat brim forward, stepped through the doorway, and had to stop. A woman lay just inside the light, back against a post, head tipped like sleep had found her, upright and unkind. Her dress was the pale, work-washed kind you saw on road wives. She had dirt in one eyebrow, as though a hand had brushed there and missed. A little girl stood next to her, with both hands locked around the woman's sleeve. The child's mouth trembled, but held. There was grit there already. On the woman's knees lay two bundles, wrapped tight in rough muslin. The bundles breathed. "Ma'am," Ezra said, quiet. The words sounded large in the emptiness. He crouched. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The little girl flinched, but the woman didn't stir. Ezra set two fingers to the side of her neck. Her pulse was there, fast and thin as a scared rabbit's. He slid his hand to her cheek. Hot. Heat hung off her like a fever stove. "Sir?" the little girl said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. "My mama went all heavy. I can see that," Ezra said, and made his voice the kind a child could step onto without falling. "What's your name, little miss?" "Letty," she said after a beat. "Mama says never talk to men you don't know, but you came quiet." "Ezra's my name. You did right, holding on to her." He looked to the bundles. The twins were small, not newborn small, but not far past it. One had worked a hand free and was pushing at his own cheek as if annoyed by the world. The other slept hard, mouth open, making the softest mouse noises. On the straw near the woman's shoulder lay a dented canteen, dry by the weight of it, and a heel of bread the color of a hard day. "Anybody else with you?" Ezra asked. He thought of the Summers riders who'd been in and out of this barn all spring, with salt sacks and spare tack, and the rough talk that came with paydays. Letty shook her head. "Two men brought us here, said they'd fetch help." She glanced toward the open sun. "They didn't come back." Ezra felt something go cold in his chest. He set his palm to the woman's wrist and found it burning. A fly worried at the corner of her mouth. He flicked it away. "Letty," he said, "I'm going to pick your mama up and carry her out. I'll need you to walk beside me and keep a hand on my coat, so I don't forget you." He tried for a smile, but didn't waste it if it wasn't there. "Can you do that?" She nodded, chin lifting. There was a smudge along her cheek, where fear had sat down and made marks. He slid one arm under the woman's shoulders and another under the bundles. She was lighter than she looked, the way women got when there wasn't any extra on their bones. As he lifted, her head lolled against his shirt front. She smelled like dust and something bitter under it, like willows crushed in a drought. "Easy," he murmured, to the babies as much as to her. The one with his hand free made a small sound of protest, and then settled when Ezra's thumb found his tiny back and rubbed it the way folks soothed colts. Out in the light, the day seemed too bright for what he held. Ezra crossed the yard and set his boot in the stirrup. He had carried calves out of snowdrifts and a partner once with a busted leg, but this was different. He didn't think about it. He lifted her up, swung into the saddle with the twins across his forearms, and drew the woman to his chest in the crook his body made. Letty clutched his coat between finger and thumb and trotted beside with the stubborn determination reserved for small children and old mules. They went slow down the trace toward Ezra's place. The gelding walked careful, as if understanding a misstep meant too much. A prairie wind came up and combed sweat off Ezra's neck. He took it like mercy. At the first cottonwoods, the woman made a sound in her throat. Ezra looked down. Her lashes quivered. She opened her eyes a sliver, tried to brace, and couldn't. "You're all right," he said. "Name's Ezra Cole. I'm taking you to my place." Her mouth shaped water without the word. He slid the canteen looped on his saddle horn free. Nothing in it. He held it anyway in case the weight might persuade Hope to stay. Letty looked up at him. "Mama's name's Alma," she offered, careful, like a coin placed in the exact center of a table. "My brothers is Luke and Harlan." "Good names," Ezra said. He didn't ask another question. The road didn't need the burden of answers yet. His place was a low-shouldered house, tucked into a windbreak of young poplars, with a porch that had learned to sag, and a pump that didn't argue if you treated it decent. He eased down, set the twins in his saddle blanket spread on the porch boards, and carried Alma inside to the bed in the room that had once been his sister's when she came west 2 winters before, and left again with a schoolmaster for Greeley. The sheets were clean by habit. He set Alma down, went to the stove, and coaxed flame with a patience that made the difference between scorched and useful. "Letty," he called, and the child appeared in the doorway with a baby tucked against each narrow hip, like she'd been born to the work. "There's a basin by the pump and a dipper. Fill it halfway and bring it here. Then wash those babies' hands and faces some. Warm water, not too much." She blinked at being given the kind of order that sounds like trust, nodded, and went. Ezra dampened a cloth and cooled Alma's forehead. Her skin radiated heat like July tin. He tipped a spoon of water into her mouth. She swallowed, coughed, took another. He made a thin gruel with the last of his milk and some cornmeal, the way a woman in the next section had shown him for a neighbor boy after fever, and got a little past Alma's cracked lips. When Letty came back, carrying the basin with a look of solemn pride, Ezra had a better look at the woman. Alma's hair was the ordinary gold that happened to some folks in this country. Bleached by sun, dark at the roots where the world began. He saw then the shadow of a bruise along one temple, not the new purple, but the yellowed edge of yesterday's anger. He had to set his jaw and count to 5 before his hand remembered gentleness. "Was there an accident?" he asked in that level, not too curious ways older cowhands used when a colt came in with a mark it hadn't made alone. Letty busied herself with Luke's tiny fingers. "Mama fell," she said quickly, which was the sentence children were taught when adults had run out of decent language. Ezra nodded, as if a fall were every story's beginning and end. He washed Alma's feet with slow strokes, the way you help a person remember they own their own body. After a while, the tightness left her mouth. She slept. He moved through the small chores of a man who lived alone and had learned what care a day's labor wanted. Set beans to soak, chopped onions, swept the porch boards so the babies wouldn't breathe straw dust, checked the gelding's left forehoof because the animal had taken a short step a mile back. In doing those simple things, the corners of fear in the house rounded some. It was one of the few real magics the plains allowed. Near sundown, Alma opened her eyes for good and found the ceiling first, then the window, then Ezra. She didn't try to sit up. She didn't apologize. That told him plenty. "Ma'am," he said, "you're in my house. Supper's near. The little ones ate milk sop and disagreed about it, but not enough to make a religion. Letty's taken to my kitchen like she's claimed it." Alma's gaze slipped to the doorway where the girl stood, mittened in flour, as proud as any housewife. Alma's eyes filled and steadied again. "Thank you," she said, voice rough. "We won't stay past good manners." "You'll stay till you stand," Ezra said, plain. Nobody's owed your hurry. A silence opened between them, not empty. In it, the wind pushed against the poplars, and a hawk cried somewhere south. Alma swallowed. 2 men, she said, and her voice had the sound of a woman who had measured each word and kept only those worth the bother. They were friends of my husband's. He worked for them, then got sick. They came to fetch him to the doctor over to Gabriel Crossing. We put the babies on the wagon and started for the road. He got worse. They said there was shade at the dry willow barn, and we'd rest. There was no doctor. They took the team and my husband's coat and the last of the flour and rode before my eyes. Said they'd bring a cart. They knew they wouldn't. She stopped, shook her head as if it belonged to someone unhelpful. He died before the second night. I couldn't lift him. I couldn't bury him. I told the children he was sleeping in the Lord. When the men came back, she touched the edge of the bruise and left it. They went through our things. They found a locket and a paper in it my husband kept, nothing but a work letter, and asked a lot of questions that didn't belong to them. They called me names I won't set in your house. They took the wagon and told us to keep quiet. They laughed when Luke cried. They said if we walked toward town, someone would find us. Ezra listened without moving. He felt the old, familiar shape of anger fill him from the feet up, the kind that didn't run hot, but went to a banked heat a man could work with. What did your husband do for them? He asked. Drove cattle and counted what came back, Alma said. He could read both numbers and men, which isn't always a skill men welcome. He said he kept things honest. She looked at her hands. Maybe that's what went wrong. Your husband's name? Ezra asked quietly. Thomas Pike, she said. When she spoke it, there was a gentling, like a hand set on a door to keep it from slamming. Ezra drew a slow breath. The name crossed the grain of a story he already knew. The summer's outfit had lost 60 head off the winter pasture, then found them again, branded new. Men had been fired. A foreman with a quick whip had moved on with no references. Somebody had talked at the feed and grain and gotten a split lip for trouble. He didn't say any of that. He went to the peg by the door, took down his old blue shirt, and folded it under Alma's head, where the pillow had flattened. Letty tugged his sleeve. Mr. Ezra, she said, can men go to jail for being mean? Sometimes, he said. Sometimes they go to hell first. She nodded gravely, as if satisfied with the order. The first spike came with the knock. It was the kind of knock that isn't sorry to be itself. Open-handed, twice, pause, once more, as if the knocker were counting his own patience. Ezra set his spoon down and wiped his hands on a towel slow, the way a man does when he intends to decide what the moment is going to be before it decides for him. He opened the door halfway. 2 riders stood in the yard, dust, hats low. Ezra knew one. The scar along his jaw had been pasted there by a boot heel in a spring fight over cards. The other wore a vest too slick for honest heat. Evening, the scarred man said. He kept his drawl easy. You Ezra Cole? Depends what he owes you, Ezra said. The slick one laughed as if humor were a small animal he didn't much like, but liked the power to make. We're looking for a woman, and 3 young ones got themselves lost out by dry willow, he said. We heard they came across your track. I come across a lot of things, Ezra said. Most of them are burrs. Name's Alma Pike, the scarred one put in. He watched Ezra's eyes and got nothing for his trouble. People who take in strays sometimes get bit. We're here to help you not have that accident. Kind of you, Ezra said, neither thankful nor not. If I see any strays, I'll tie a red string on them so you know. The slick man shifted his weight, boot toe drawing a line in Ezra's dust like a boy daring the world to step over. Thing is, he said, glancing toward the window where a curtain moved because Letty's breath had moved it. She's got something belongs to our boss. Paper. He wants it back. Alma's eyes met Ezra's from the bed. She shook her head once. There was no fear in it, only refusal. Ezra opened the door a finger's width wider. "Your boss is welcome to come ask himself," he said. "He knows the way?" "Summers knows all the ways," the slick one said, too quick, then looked like he wished he had swallowed his tongue. Ezra gave them nothing more. "It's supper time," he said. "If you want to talk further, come back when the coffee's cold and the moon's up. Men do better under a sky that's the same for all of us." The scarred one studied him as if he were measuring timber. Then he tipped his hat. "We'll do that." They swung up and rode off toward the road that led past the old quarry. Ezra watched until the dust lay down. He shut the door and set the bar. "Summers," Alma whispered. Her hand had gone to her bodice where a locket might have been. Ezra noticed the square of muslin stitched inside the twins' wraps, each a different color thread, the kind of hiding place a man who liked quiet truths might choose. "You'll tell me later," he said, "after the babies settle and Letty sleeps." He poured beans into bowls, cut bread thin to make more of it, set a spoon by Alma's hand, and took his own supper standing for a while, because sitting felt like too much permission. They ate and didn't talk. Letty made a game of counting Luke's small toes, as if numbers could put a fence around something. The twins blinked and slept and woke and forgot why, the way babies did and men envied. Night set down firm. Ezra lit the lamp and trimmed it low. He checked the latch twice, poured water into the basin for morning, and pulled a blanket over the chair by Alma's bed, because he did not intend to be far if the fever swung mean. He had just let his eyes close when a shadow crossed the window and a fist hit the door again, not patient this time. A voice followed, shaped for the outside so it would carry. A voice that was used to being obeyed because it had never learned loss. "Cole," it called. "Open up, hand over Alma Pike and the babies, and no harm comes to your place." Letty sat bolt upright on the pallet he'd made for her, eyes huge. Alma reached for the twins and found Ezra first. He touched her wrist, a steadying, nothing more. He stood, took the rifle from above the mantel out of long habit, then thought better and set it back. Men who meant to shoot did not make speeches. Men who meant to scare did. He raised the bar and opened the door to the width of his body. 4 riders sat their horses in the blue dark. The one in the center wore a neat hat and a vest that fit like a lie. Ezra didn't know his name, but he knew the type. The man smiled, and the smile said he had never eaten beans because he had to. "Evening," the man said. "I'm Lyle Summers. I'm here about what belongs to me." Ezra did not step aside. Behind him, he felt Alma gather the twins under her arms, and he heard Letty's breath flutter and then hold. The man's smile thinned. "You got something to say to that cowhand?" Ezra tipped his hat the bare measure courtesy required, and none of the respect. "I do," he said, and his voice came out low and ironed flat. "This house is mine. The people in it are guests. If you aim to talk, you can do it at sunup with coffee you brought yourself. If you aim to take, you'll have to try it against a man who's carried heavier." Summer's eyes cooled the way a pond ices from the edges. He leaned a little in his saddle, as if to see past Ezra into the lamplight, where the smallness of what he wanted made his bigness ugly. "Then sunup it is," he said softly. "And Cole, best tell your guest to find that paper between now and then. Makes the morning smoother." He wheeled his horse and the men swung with him. Hoofbeats counted down the yard and out to the road, and the night folded around the house again. Ezra shut the door and set the bar, not because he believed wood could keep out all kinds of trouble, but because you start with what you can. He turned. Alma had ended up sitting with her back against the bedpost, the twins looser in her lap. Letty pressed to her side. The lamp caught on a small square of something white. Father Pike had stitched into the hem of one muslin wrap. Ezra hadn't seen it before. Alma unpicked 2 hidden stitches with a fingernail and slid out a folded scrap, stiff with sweat and travel. "That paper," she whispered. "It isn't a deed. It isn't money. It's a list of cattle counted wrong and brands that changed in the night." She looked up at him, eyes steady with the kind of courage that wears through its own fear. "My husband wrote the names of the men who did it. He said decent ranches could be ruined by decent silence. He said give this to somebody who wouldn't look away." Ezra's mouth went dry. He looked down at the names scrawled there, one of them familiar enough to still a heart. Lyle Summers. Outside, where the yard met the road, a match flared and went out. Ezra smelled tobacco and a decision. "Letty," he said, not taking his eyes off the paper, "you and your mama and the babies are going to sleep in the cellar tonight." "Is it a game?" she whispered. "It is the kind we win by being quiet," he said. He folded the paper, slid it into the Bible on the mantel, because some covers still counted for something, and felt the story tighten like a cinch. Morning would bring coffee or fire. Either way, the quiet cowboy who had carried a woman and 2 babies home understood he had been carrying more than bodies, and out under the poplars, hoofbeats turned back toward the house. The night didn't feel right. Ezra could tell by the way the wind seemed to pause before it reached the poplars, how even the gelding in the corral stood with his ears forward, not chewing, just listening. He'd sat in the chair by the bed until the lamplight thinned to a pale gold puddle, his hat tipped low, rifle leaning against the wall behind him. Every so often he'd hear the cellar's faint creak as Alma shifted the twins, or Letty whispered a question too quiet for him to catch. Summers had left with the promise of sunup, but Ezra had learned that men who liked the sound of their own threats often couldn't resist the sound of their boots on the porch sooner than planned. It was near the dead of night when the sound came. Hoofbeats again, this time muffled, stopping just short of the yard. Ezra rose without hurry. The door gave a tiny shiver in its frame before the first knock came, softer than before but with more weight in it, as though the knocker wanted to test the strength of the wood. He crossed the room, keeping himself between the door and the cellar hatch. "You're here early," he called, his voice even. A pause. Then a man's voice, not Summers, but someone with a deeper drawl. "We thought you might want to sleep easy, Cole. You hand over the woman and the paper now, you can." The words were slow, deliberate, as if he was rolling each one in his mouth before letting it go. Ezra leaned one shoulder against the wall. "Paper doesn't mean much in the dark," he said. "Best wait until daylight if you want to read it proper." The man chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "Reading's not what our boss aims to do with it." The boards on the porch gave a long, warning groan. Ezra eased his hand toward the latch. If they meant to push in, they'd do it in the next breath. Instead, the footsteps retreated. Hoofbeats again, fading slow. Ezra didn't relax. They could be circling, trying to find if there was another way in. He went to the back window, scanned the yard's edge. Nothing but the shimmer of moonlight on frost-tipped grass. By first light, the tension in the house was as taut as a wet rope. Alma emerged from the cellar with the twins bundled in shawls, her face pale but set. Letty followed, rubbing her eyes with one ball fist. Ezra was at the stove, frying salt pork, the smell curling through the air. "They're coming," he said without looking at her. "How many?" "More than last night." They ate standing, quick bites between gathering what they might need if they had to move fast. Extra cloth for the twins, Alma's locket, a half sack of flour. Ezra tucked the folded paper back into the Bible's hollow, wrapped it in a strip of oilskin. By the time the sun had cleared the cottonwoods, They heard them. 6 riders, the crunch of hooves on frozen dirt. Summers was at their head, neat hat casting a long shadow. He reined up short of the porch, a smile fixed on his face like it had been nailed there. "Morning, Cole," he said, as if this were a neighborly call. "You've had your night. Now I'll have my paper." Ezra stepped onto the porch, leaving the door ajar. "I've had a thought, Summers. If this paper's as worthless as you say, why send half your crew to fetch it?" Summers' smile thinned. "Because worthless or not, it doesn't belong to her, and a man can't let folks walk off with what's his. Bad example." Ezra took the step down into the yard, closing the distance between them until he could see the fine stitching on Summers' vest. "A man sets his own example. You ride in here like you own the county. You'll get met like a man trying to steal it." Summers' eyes flicked toward the open door. "She inside?" "She's not yours to look at." The spike came quick. One of Summers' men, the scarred one, shifted in the saddle, eyes scanning past Ezra. "Riders coming," he muttered. Summers turned his head. Over the rise to the east, 3 figures on horseback were making their way toward the yard, moving steady. As they drew closer, the sunlight caught on a badge pinned to the lead rider's coat. "Sheriff Dugan." Ezra let the smallest smile touch his mouth. "Guess the county's got its own interest in this little matter." Summers' gaze snapped back to him. "You brought the law into this?" "Seems the law's got a mind to come where it's needed," Ezra said. Dugan reined up between them, his voice carrying the easy weight of a man who'd kept order on the frontier long enough to know its cost. "Morning, Summers. Cole, I hear there's a dispute over a piece of paper." Summers straightened in the saddle, his tone smooth. "Just reclaiming stolen property, Sheriff." Dugan looked to Ezra. "That's so." Ezra didn't look away. "Property's a list of cattle switched under Summers' brand, written by a man named Thomas Pike before he died. His widow's inside. Seems to me she's the rightful keeper." A shadow crossed Summers' expression. "That's a lie." "Then you won't mind if I take a look at it," Dugan said. Ezra stepped back, letting the sheriff dismount. He fetched the oilskin-wrapped paper from the mantel and placed it in Dugan's hands. The sheriff read slowly, jaw tightening with each name. When he was done, he folded it neat and tucked it into his coat. "This stays with me," he said. "And Summers, you'll ride back to town. We'll talk more in my office." For a moment, Ezra thought Summers might push it, but the sheriff's presence and the watchful eyes of his men kept him still. With a tight rein and a tighter jaw, Summers turned his horse, his men following. When they were gone, Dugan looked at Ezra. "You've got yourself a storm brewing. Keep her and those children close. I'll see what I can do to make this paper worth the risk you've taken." Ezra nodded. "Appreciate it." Alma stood in the doorway, Letty at her side, the twins quiet in her arms. For the first time since he'd found her, there was the faintest hint of color in her cheeks. But Ezra knew Summers wasn't done, not by a long shot. And before the week was out, they'd have to decide whether to wait for his next move or make one of their own. 2 days after Sheriff Dugan had taken the paper into town, the weather shifted. A warm wind blew in from the south, carrying with it the smell of dust and mesquite. Ezra knew that kind of wind, too soft on the skin, like a smile meant to hide a knife. It was the kind of weather men rode in under, thinking it would cover the sound of their trouble. Alma kept busy inside, tending to the twins and teaching Letty how to sew a straight seam. But Ezra caught her more than once glancing toward the window, her hands stilling. She didn't need to say it. She felt the same pressure in the air that he did. Near sundown, a lone rider appeared on the ridge east of the place. Ezra stepped onto the porch, hand resting on the rail, and watched as the man sat his horse without moving closer. The sun was low enough to cast the rider in shadow, but the outline of his hat was wrong for any local. He didn't ride down, just turned his mount after a long look and vanished back over the ridge. That night, Ezra didn't sleep. He dozed in the chair by the front door, rifle across his lap, listening to the creak of the poplars and the faint hum of Alma's lullaby drifting up from the room where the twins lay. By morning, the quiet was gone. While checking the pasture fence, Ezra found one of the gelding's tracks leading off toward the far arroyo, 2 sets of hoofprints beside it. Whoever had been watching the house had been close enough to touch it. He saddled up and rode into town. Dugan's office was locked. A note tacked to the door said the sheriff had ridden to the West Range to settle a grazing dispute, gone 2 days, maybe 3, which meant Summers had the run of the county. When Ezra returned, Alma met him on the porch. Her face was pale, and she held a scrap of paper in her hand. "This was nailed to the barn door," she said. The note was scrawled in a hurried hand. "Leave before sunset tomorrow, or we take more than the paper." Ezra read it twice, jaw tight. "They're done asking." Alma's eyes met his. "Then we have to be gone before they come." He shook his head. "If we leave now, they'll follow. Out there, we've got nothing but open ground. Here, I can make them come on my terms." "Ezra," she began, but stopped when she saw the look in his eyes. The rest of the day was spent in quiet preparation. He filled the cellar with water, stacked wood by the back door, and checked the shotgun. Alma helped where she could, even when the twins fussed, her hands moving without pause. As the sun dropped, they ate a small supper in silence. Letty tried to ask why they couldn't just ride away, but Alma smoothed her hair and said only, "Because sometimes you have to stand where you are." They were still clearing the dishes when the dogs in the distance began barking, a rolling chorus that moved closer. Ezra stepped to the porch and saw them. 4 riders coming down the road, Summers at the lead, the same neat hat, the same sharp set to his shoulders. They stopped 30 yards from the house. Summers called out, "Evening, Cole. Thought we'd finish our business." Ezra stepped down into the yard, the rifle loose in his hands. "Business was done when the sheriff took that paper." Summers' smile was thin as the wind. "Sheriff's not here. Paper's no good if the one holding it doesn't make it back to town." His gaze shifted toward the house. "And she's not going to make it." Ezra's finger tightened just slightly on the rifle's stock. "You ride 1 more step, Summers, and you'll see what happens to men who threaten guests under my roof." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Summers swung down from his horse and started forward, slow and deliberate. His men followed, fanning out. Behind Ezra, the door creaked. Alma stepping into the doorway, the twins in her arms, Letty clutching her skirt. "Ezra," she said softly, "they won't stop." "I know," he replied without turning. "That's why we end it tonight." Summers took another step, the heel of his boot crunching in the dirt. "And how exactly are you planning to do that, Cole?" Ezra didn't answer. Not yet. He was waiting for the last man in Summers' line to move just a little closer to the old fence post where he'd buried a surprise earlier that afternoon. The moment that man's boot touched the post's shadow, Ezra gave a low whistle. The sound that followed was nothing Summers expected. The whistle barely left Ezra's lips before the ground at the post's base came alive. A length of rope, hidden beneath a thin layer of dirt, jerked tight, yanking a looped snare around the rider's boots. The man toppled with a grunt, his rifle skittering across the ground. His horse spooked, sidestepping into the next rider, and in the sudden confusion, Ezra swung his rifle up, not to fire, but to point square at Summers' chest. "Step back," Ezra said, his voice low and flat as hammered iron. Summers froze, eyes narrowing. "You think a trap and a threat will stop me?" "It's not the trap," Ezra said. "It's the fact you're standing where I decide what happens next." Summer's men hesitated, looking from the rope-tangled rider to the calm steadiness in Ezra's stance. They weren't cowards, but they weren't fools either, and they'd just seen their boss walk into a man's home ground.
Alma's voice cut through the standoff. She stepped forward, still holding the twins, Letty close at her side. Lyle Summers, my husband died trying to keep your theft quiet, but before he died, he put your name on a list. That list is with the sheriff now. Summers' eyes flickered, but his mouth twisted in a sneer. Sheriff can't protect you forever. No, Alma said, but he can protect the truth long enough for it to outlive you. For a moment, the yard held nothing but the sound of the wind in the poplars. Ezra could see the calculation in Summers' gaze, the way he measured the distance to the house, the loyalty of his men, the risk of pushing too far here and now. Finally, he spat in the dirt. This isn't over. Ezra didn't lower the rifle. It's over for tonight, and you're riding out while you still can. Summers hesitated another breath, then swung into the saddle. One by one, his men followed, the rope-snared rider limping to mount last. They rode off toward the road, dust swallowing them by the bend. Ezra stood still until the last hoofbeat faded, then let the rifle drop to his side. Inside, the house was quiet except for the twins' soft breathing. Alma set them in their cradle and turned to Ezra. You could have shot him. Could have, Ezra said. But then I'd have his men to bury, and the sheriff would have more trouble than paper can fix. Better to let him live knowing he's been beaten in his own game. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you, for tonight. For all of it. Ezra shrugged, but his voice was softer when he said, You don't owe me thanks. Just promise me you'll stay close to town until Dugan can set this straight. Alma's eyes went to the window where the last light of day was fading. The land my husband wanted for us, it's still out there. I'll see it one way or another. Ezra studied her, seeing not the worn dress or the shadows under her eyes, but the grit in her spine. Then you'll have it, he said. And when you do, you won't be standing alone. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the clean scent of night rain. Inside, the children slept, and for the first time since he'd found her in the barn, Alma's shoulders eased, not because the danger was gone, but because she knew she'd met someone willing to face it with her. In the Old West, that was sometimes as close to peace as a body could get. In a land where justice was often slow to ride in, kindness sometimes came quicker and stayed longer. Ezra hadn't just carried Alma from that barn. He'd carried her back to a life worth fighting for.